gonna get started. I'm gonna ask a question one more time. Is anyone here from Brattleboro? Oh, fabulous, great. I told you that there's been some lost and found items. Great. Okay.
Hello, Bob.
I'm gonna ignore you, Don.
Joey, I want your attention. I'm going to hand her up for just a second. My name is Don Hooper. I happen to be on the Vermont Natural Resources Council board, and recently they said we'd really like to boost our membership so we have more of a impact in the legislature. And so I wrote down the names of 50 buddies and friends and neighbors I thought were surely VNRC members. And I got back the several pages of notes and names, and I found that 43 of them were not members. And of the 7 that were, 3 of them were lapsed. So please, before you leave today, join VNRC or one of these other good fellow travelers. VPIRG, Energy Action Network, and so on. Sierra, they do such good work for us, and we come away annually with a ton of new information, great networking, and lots of money-saving ideas. So join these places. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I would like to invite Haley Perro up to the stage just to say a couple brief remarks from our dearly beloved Senator Bernie Sanders, who has deep love in his heart for the work at the local level and the dedication of the state's network of town energy committees. He has joined us here in person many times in the past. He is unable to attend for very good reason, and we are grateful to have Haley say just a couple words. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here today and to really be re-energized by this conference year in and year out. I'd like to share the following message from Bernie. Dear friends, I'm very sorry I cannot join you for today's VECAN conference, but I appreciate the opportunity to send a few words of thanks and encouragement. First, let me thank Joanna Miller for organizing this important event. It is no secret that one of the most important issues we face as a nation and as a world is global climate change. And I believe we must call it what it really is, a national emergency. While the challenge we face is huge, we can and we must meet it head on. To address climate change, we need a social, industrial, and economic mobilization of resources and labor. And we also need leadership to stand up to the fossil fuel industry and tell them that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of the planet. I will do my part in Washington to fight for strong climate legislation and a Green New Deal. But I've always believed that change happens when people come together and speak out. Change happens when people get involved in their communities. And change happens when people organize at the grassroots level and educate their neighbors about how they can be part of the clean energy future. This is exactly what you are doing, and I'm enormously proud of your efforts. You all have an important role to play in transforming our energy system from the ground up, and I thank you for your tireless work that you're doing to ensure that the planet we leave our children and grandchildren is just as habitable as the one we now enjoy. Thank you again for your dedication, and keep up the good work. Sincerely, Bernie Sanders, U.S. Senator.
And thanks to the good senator for all he does. In just a moment, I'm going to introduce Senator Tim Ashe, but just logistically, we're going to hear from Senator Ashe for about 15 or 20 minutes. Ideally, we're going to have time for a couple of questions. Then we will hear from our keynote speaker, Representative Chloe Maxman, who is here from rural Maine. We're very excited to have Chloe with us. She will also entertain a few questions. And then we do invite you all to stay, grab a snack before you go. We have some hot and cold hors d'oeuvres and a cash bar. So I just want to give you a little logistical overview of what we're up to. But it is now my pleasure to introduce Senator Tim Ashe next. Senator Ashe has spent much of his professional career in pursuit of affordable housing and clean energy solutions. He has spent his legislative career, including as former chair of the House Finance Committee, doing the same. At the start of the last biennium, Senator Ashe, I believe I mentioned earlier, also joined the Senate Transportation Committee, with a clear interest in tackling our most carbon-intensive sector. I've seen Senator Ashe at more and more of these types of events, and I'm grateful for what it seems like his very clear intent to really help in his leadership role ensure that Vermont makes progress tackling this incredible urgent issue, and also doing it in a way that grows our economy and ensures equity. So Senator Ashe is going to share a little bit about his vision for climate action in every single committee room in the state Senate. So welcome, Senator Ashe.
Well, thank you, and
Sorry.
Does this work? Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to begin really with an acknowledgement of the work that many of you do. There are people in the room who are paid to do the work you do that fights climate change in whichever sector it is, and I absolutely commend all of you who fall into that category. But there are many of you who do not get paid to do the work that we're talking about today, and I'm especially grateful for you. Many of you toil away on energy committees or local transportation committees, and sometimes you wonder, are all the meetings worth it? And they absolutely are, because it is the faces in a room like this that really speak to people like me and Senators Perchlik and McDonald, and the House members are here, and say, the people want this, and the people expect it, and they've got to get it. And just in the last few years, it has been local town energy committees who have brought forth policies which have created some of the largest solar projects in the state. I'm specifically thinking about South Burlington and Brattleboro, where it was Joey working with town energy committees that actually brought that to the legislature, and we passed it, and both of those projects now are producing a huge amount of clean energy. So I just wanted to say how appreciative I am of those of you on the ground doing this on a volunteer basis, because you know how important this is. So when Joey asked me to speak, I thought, well, all right, you need a good title. And at the time I thought combating climate change in every committee room sounded great. Then I had to figure out, all right, well, what does that look like? But I think I've settled on some stuff to work. But I want to begin, though, by just kind of painting the Vermont emissions picture as I see it. And much of it will be perhaps a slightly different twist on some of the themes that have already been explored today. But I'll begin with the simple acknowledgement that it is our transportation sector that not only is the biggest contributor to harmful emissions in Vermont, but also an acknowledgement or admission that the legislature and executive branch over the last several decades have not focused at all, in my opinion, on this important area. And as Joey said, one of my missions as the leader of the Senate and now a member of our Transportation Committee is to change that. But when we start, one of the important things is so many people are so passionate, appropriately, about doing our part to fight climate change. And we often think about ourselves in relation to other states. And I want to first just situate us with some of the other states, because what we frequently will hear is references from point A to point B and what our emissions profile has looked like. And one of Vermont's special challenges is going to be highlighted in the next few slides. The New York Times put together these really snazzy electric generation charts for every single state in the country, and if anyone wants a link, I'm happy to forward it to you. So I'm going to just show you Vermont and then Massachusetts, and one other state to follow. And what it shows is basically from 2001 till roughly today what the electric generation profile has been in each state. And you'll see here, obviously, this big whale-looking thing, the nuclear, that was Vermont Yankee, and when it got shut down, obviously nuclear went to 0%, and others had to make up that percentage of Vermont's electrical mix. But the picture here says that from the electric generating side, Vermont had relatively low emissions to start with in-state, and it has relatively low emissions here at the finish line. We look at a state like Massachusetts, the picture is a little bit different. Their starting picture, you see the brown sort of second largest snaking thing going from left to right, and the pink one right below it. That's coal and petroleum electric generation. So one of the ways they've been able to succeed in reducing their statewide emissions has been to, and we're glad for this, shut down coal and petroleum power stations. Same rough story is told when you look at New York. In New York, you can see that they had coal and petroleum. As they phased those out, they resorted to other sources of electric generation, which have their own issues, but are lower in the harmful emissions that are produced. So from an electric generation side, Vermont didn't have some of the, what I'll call low-hanging, horrible fruits to pick that some of our neighboring states have had. Where we look a lot more like the states around us is when it comes to transportation. Again, the New York Times put together this really wonderful interactive map. The only thing wonderful about it is how interactive it is. The news it tells is actually quite bad. But what you'll see here, and I'll read out just a few for people who might struggle to see some of the information, is that in metro areas, all in our region, the transportation emissions have been going up considerably. Portland, Maine, 46% increase since 1990. The Albany metro area, 17% in the same period of time. Worcester, 18% increase. Providence, 13% increase. And on with the other municipalities. Vermont, at the same time, 28%. So one of the higher increases that we've seen in that period. So Vermont is not alone in its negligence of taking on transportation emissions. And that's why I'm very pleased at the work that's going on to move towards the Transportation and Climate Initiative with all of these states so that we can start doing something about it. One of the particular challenges we have is the vehicles that exist on the roads today. We all know that electric vehicles, we only have something just over 3,000 on the road registered today, that we need far more, far quicker. I am sometimes accused of being a little bit of a geek, so I got a very large spreadsheet and I tried to figure out what are the most prevalent registered vehicles in Vermont today. So this data here, this is the number of actual vehicles of any age for each of these vehicle types, and you can see that number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are trucks. Well, there are no electric trucks right now that are on the market in Vermont. And that presents some interesting challenges because not only are they 1, 2, 3, and 4, but they're 1, 2, 3, and 4 by far. There's about 25,000 Ford F-Series trucks on the road. There's almost 20,000 Chevy Silverados, and there's just under that of both the Toyota and GMC models. So we have people purchasing relatively inefficient vehicles because that's rural Vermont and having to get through muddy roads and all those other things. But it speaks to one of those challenges as the auto manufacturers are not creating more efficient versions of these vehicles. It actually makes our challenge of addressing the emissions all the more difficult. Now, the next 3 slides, and I'll be very quick because I do want to have the opportunity for as many questions as possible. This ISO New England. ISO New England, for those of you who don't know, is the New England-wide, basically power supply partnership. And this represents the current mix, if you look all the way to the right of the image that you're looking at, of electric generation throughout the state. And you can see that we've phased out some really nasty stuff, but not nearly at the levels we need. Now, I have an app on my phone. I only have like 3 apps. One of them is ISO to go. ISO to go makes me, I'll let you judge what that makes me. But at 8:30 this morning, I produced this image off my app, which meant that when the lights went on at this facility, this was the power source that was producing the electricity throughout the entire region. The big 50+% one is natural gas. The orange, which is the next biggest, 30% nuclear, 10% renewables, and then hydro, 7%, and coal, just under 1%. So as we think about enhancing our transportation fleet, we have to remember that when someone plugs their vehicle into the wall, the power that's sourcing it it's not necessarily clean power. So we've got to be working on multiple fronts to make sure that not only are we electrifying, but when we do, it's good, clean power. Now, we also have this issue. It said something like 7 to 10% was renewables. Well, what is renewables? At the exact same time, I was able to say, of that slice of renewable, what were the sources of renewable power? And you'll see here, 37% was wind power. This is wind being produced all over the New England region. 29% refuse. I'm not sure many people knew that incinerating waste was our second highest source of renewable power when we put on the lights here at Lake Maury. And then wood, 29%, landfill gas, 3%, and solar, 3%. So I say those not because it's important for that particular moment, but as we think about the relationship of beneficial electrification with the actual sources of that electricity, that has to really be on our minds. Now, I'm going to briefly tell you some of the things we did last year. I'll make these things available so you can look in greater detail and forward me questions if you have them. But one of the things we sometimes hear from people who are deeply passionate about fighting climate change is, why haven't you done anything? And to be fair to the people in this room, if any of you have said that, we hear that from almost every group on every issue, is why haven't you done it? Because we all know the challenges are so great and our individual, every year our strategies are not sufficient to solve problems decades in the making. However, just on the transportation front, while we work through the Transportation Climate Initiative negotiations, which are very promising, we made significant strides in trying to reduce transportation emissions with the dollars we already have. The first issue here, and I'll highlight, is the Park and Ride program. This may seem small, but of course the most fuel efficient and least emitting vehicle is the one you don't get into. And so Park and Rides, we have funded the construction and design of 544 more by the end of the 2020 construction season. That is a 1/3 statewide increase, not to be overlooked as we think about strategies that we need to bring to bear. And I'll put it in perspective. I live in Burlington. 142 spaces are going to go up in Williston. You can imagine the demand there is for those spaces in getting 142 cars off the road as they head south, either to Waterbury, Montpelier, or beyond. There are other ones that are kind of in queue lining up on I-91 and other ones on I-89. So the whole state will benefit from these kinds of investments. On public transit, you can see the significant increases we've made there. But I'm going to tell you, these are challenging times for public transit. We effectively have one large public transit system in the state, which is Green Mountain Transit, which is in Chittenden County and Washington County and a little bit of dabbling elsewhere. They're under some real duress right now in their budget and talking about cutting routes, cutting marketing to get more people into public transit. So one of the things the legislature has done is proceeded with a full investigation and hired some really great transportation thinkers to think about how we get more people realistically into public transit. On the rail side, we're finally inching towards rail service to New York City from Burlington, which will benefit the entire western corridor of the state. These are real dollar investments that are really making a difference. We also set in motion a number of inquiries. For instance, should we provide a time of sale rebate to people who purchase vehicles that perform at a good environmental level with a disincentive for those who are buying cars that are not very efficient? Yeah. That is a very, I think I heard, that was like a straw poll. But I think, let's be clear, for many people who aren't in this room, that is a serious political question, and we're going to have to grapple with that, but it's an important one. I'll tell you one little bit of trivia. According to knowledgeable people at the Energy Action Network, I hope they're knowledgeable because I'm about to cite it as a fact, that the average statewide miles per gallon for the vehicles on the road is just more than 22 miles a gallon. So just think about what that means as we think about needing to do more on transportation emissions. 22 miles per gallon. Did I get that right, Jared?
That's what our latest report says.
All right, so if you trust Energy Action Network, it's 22 miles a gallon. We're also trying to model behavior out of state government to do the things that we're encouraging people in their private lives to do. And a few examples, our own state transportation fleet. Senator Perchlik and I on the Transportation Committee looked at all the state-owned vehicles. You can see here there's 734. We found that only 54 of them happen to be hybrids or electric and have created new purchasing requirements to significantly boost that. And then lastly, we created 2 programs, one to provide cash incentives for people who are buying plug-in electric vehicles. That is likely to go live later, well, in this upcoming week. So stay tuned for those of you who have had interest but have been unable to purchase it for financial reasons. Those incentives will come online. We've also importantly considered equity already in making sure that we're not just thinking about the change in transportation from the point of view of those who have the resources to perhaps buy a new electric car, but to make sure that lower income people, especially in rural areas, have access to high efficiency vehicles no matter what they are. And now I just want to settle on that one because I find that an interesting example of the kind of difficult challenges we have. Last year, when the Senate Transportation Committee started talking about a program to use funds to help people get into used hybrids that have combustion engines, there were some in the environmental community who said, no, it has to be electric. We said, if you are interested in equity and doing a better job for the environment, you have to also be willing for those who can't afford to buy an electric car to support them to get into something much better than what they have. If you're in a 15-mile-a-gallon car and you can get into a used hybrid that gets 50, for you that is a huge environmental improvement, and leaving that person with no options should not be something that we all accept. So we have our challenges ahead in that regard. We did some things that weren't transportation. This is not meant to be focused there, although that's the biggest chunk we've got to address. Working with people like Selena and Zach Ralph, who I saw somewhere in here, and if there are any other House members, doubling weatherization funding, which has been the call for many people in this room for so long. We reauthorized the State Energy Management Plan, which each year is making massive investments in our own state properties to reduce fossil fuel use and save taxpayer money. Extending the advanced wood boiler tax credit, which came out of our Agriculture Committee, and also focusing on the preservation of large tracts of forest land, which historically would have been thought about for their habitat and all those other important considerations, but we're now starting to think about whether they could be important contributors in forest carbon sequestration and the burgeoning thinking about how that would work. So now, and I'm talking fast because I wanted to have questions, so I'm sorry, maybe I'm over-caffeinated. But I said that the challenge of how we would fight climate change in every committee was sort of daunting, but I'm going to give it my best shot, and these are, in my opinion, very sincere strategies that are going to be discussed in the 2020 session. I can speak from the Senate side, but I know that House members here will say that this all makes sense to them. So our Agriculture Committee, which long ago, not so long ago, would have been thinking primarily about their focus just on the dairy industry, have taken a much wider view on their policy front in recent years and are very interested in this issue of how to support landowners, farmers, foresters in the new industry of forest carbon sequestration. There's a great working group that's been meeting, and the Agriculture Committee will be taking that up to see how we can support those strategies, which will help farms be viable while we're at it. On the Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs Committee, so this is each of the Senate committees in alphabetical order, just so you know. The promotion of new housing and investment in downtown and village centers. It's often lost on people that smart growth development is a climate change fighting strategy. There is, I should acknowledge, we have lost a real champion in that regard, Paul Brune. Many of you have worked with Paul, especially preserving. He was at Preservation Trust of Vermont. But people forget that all the work he's done to make the villages and downtowns of Vermont, the special places they've always been, have continued to attract people, is actually a strategy to fight carbon change without putting that name on it. So I want to acknowledge all that he's done. On the education side, we have major capital needs to be made at our K-12 school infrastructure all throughout the state and at our higher education buildings. And our Education Committee will be taking a look at how we continue to make progress there. Our Finance Committee, for those of you who are unfamiliar, our Finance Committee has oversight of utilities and kind of regulatory agencies like the Public Utility Commission. They will be looking at the issue of accelerating Vermont's 100% renewable electricity requirement and looking at an important shift in how we think about Efficiency Vermont's mission, which we began last year. That one falls into the category of really significant changes that you don't go into lightly, but have tremendous opportunity to reduce carbon emissions on the other side of it. The Government Operations Committee, not normally thought of as a climate change committee. We have draft legislation that will require as a condition of licensing that people do an education model in the way their particular occupation affects the environmental performance of the state. Just a couple examples. If you're a plumber, you should have to be educated in how the controls on the equipment you're installing draw down demand for natural gas or whatever the other fuel is. If you're a real estate agent, you should know how solar panels on the roof of a building impact the value of the homes. I'm not sure if they're for or against the real estate people, but I think I'm with them in spirit, though. The Health and Welfare Committee will be looking at resilience issues around climate-related health impacts. Anyone who's seen the data about tick-borne diseases knows that this is not something that's in the future. It's not only is it already here, but we're catching up to how much it's already here. The Institutions Committee will continue to make advances on energy improvement in our state buildings and all the people we fund. The Judiciary Committee, and this is a bit of an interesting one for me, and it's speaking here today that made me really think about how this is something we need to work on. Many of you know that the Trump administration has tried to strike down the CAFE standards. That's what this stands for, Corporate Average Fuel Economy. We call them CAFE. I'm not sure anyone could have told me what that meant. I didn't know. But if those go away and the auto manufacturers do not produce more efficient vehicles, meeting any of our environmental targets will be virtually impossible. So our Judiciary Committee will be at the table with the Attorney General's office, making sure that by some manner we successfully preserve that important environmental strategy where California is the leader. Our Natural Resources and Energy Committee has a whole array of interventions in the discussions that many of you have been having throughout the building here today. Among them, in my opinion, are thinking about the policies around battery storage, which is increasingly an important piece of both resilience, but also making our renewable energy more efficient and more appropriate for meeting needs both in rural and non-rural communities. Also addressing in-state hydro issues. Many of you have read about the Supreme Court case, which requires the curtailment of an existing hydro dam so that the water quality and habitat issues will be enhanced. So here you have two conflicting goals. We want the water quality, we also want the clean power. What happens now, because we have a whole number of other hydro dams around the state who are all going to be facing the exact same issue. So that's going to be something that we all together struggle through. Transportation, I talked a bit about some of these things. All I can tell you is that I am actually really impressed with the team of people Governor Scott has had working on this on our behalf with the other states. Peter Walk, who some of you know, was here earlier talking about TCI, Michelle Boomhauer, Dan Dutcher, and others. They are all delivering the kind of, they're expressing the kind of values that all of the people in this room, I think, would expect them to do, and I think it's a credit to the governor. He has selected this team to be at the table. And I look forward to seeing what they do. And then lastly, appropriations, who I say have to figure out how to pay for all this. It's a small matter, but we'll see how they do. So I'm going to just finish with this. I have this one image, and I just want to tell you a quick story, and then happy to take questions and whatever time Joey gives me. So this is a photo that was taken in October of 2009. Any of you who know Burlington decently well have seen the building on the right there. That is 3 Cathedral Square, where I used to work, and it's right on the corner of Battery Street and Cherry Street, and that is a 36 kilowatt PV solar system on the top. The photo with me and my compadres there, if we had been on the other side with the panels showing, we'd be dangling from the front of that building, so we opted for safety. But I show this because 2010 is not that long ago. A 36 kilowatt system. This was the biggest one in Burlington, Vermont at the time. Just think about it. Now it would be considered an afterthought project. But 36 kilowatts was the biggest one in Burlington at the time. And so I mention that to say how very far we've come in a relatively short time. So we know how much more work we have to do together, but it's worth acknowledging that, I mean, I'm very pro-government. I believe government can change the world for better, for better and for good. But I would never believe we have been able to move government as fast as we have in the last 9 years on so many fronts. And so I do think that's a tribute to many of the people in this room that you've been able to work with us and push us in those important ways. So with that, I'd love to hear some questions for anything I've missed or things you want to better understand the thinking of the legislature. Thank you.
I guess what I would like to do is say deep gratitude to Senator Ashe for being with us today. Yes, please, thank you. I do not think we will have time for questions, but one thing I would like to do is encourage you, to, unless I could, well, no, I think we're running way too over time. This is what I'm going to ask you to do. Write your questions on the Slido app, or give them to me, and I will give them to the good senator, and one of us on my team will translate his answers at some point soon.
All right, and I'll just amplify that by saying that any questions you have as we move forward, feel free to contact me directly or work with any of the senators you have. But it is absolutely going to be the case that the legislature faces pressure and tension from the people in the community, which is exactly the way it should be, and that together we're going to do the best job we can to move forward on all these environmental frontiers. So thank you very much for all that you're doing to support the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you again. Quickly, Sheldon. Public service announcement. Somebody else has lost a pair of glasses. There are several things now in the lost and found. These are now up here, but I will bring them down to this desk. I'm going to now turn the mic over because we are going to culminate our day formally together with a great keynote speaker we're very excited to have here. My pleasure to turn the mic over to my colleague Sheldon Goodwin, the political campaign organizer, outreach at Vermont Conservation Voters, who will say a few words to introduce our keynote speaker. Take it away, Sheldon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, like Joey said, my name is Sheldon Goodwin, and I work for the Vermont Conservation Voters. And first I want to, can you hear me better?
That's better, yes.
Okay. So again, my name is Sheldon Goodwin, and I work for the Vermont Conservation Voters. And first I want to thank Senator Ashe for being here and for his comments. I'm looking forward to seeing what the Senate will do in 2020. So I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Rep. Chloe Maxim. Rep. Maxim is a lifelong activist and has been working to push climate action since 12 years old. In 2012, Rep. Maxim co-founded Divest Harvard, a movement to push Harvard to divest from fossil fuel companies. She helped to grow the campaign from 10 supporters to 70,000 supporters. Since that historic campaign, Rep. Maxim had continued to advocate for climate action and received national and international recognition for her activism. In 2018, she ran for Maine State Representative on a climate action platform and won. She ran because she believes that, quote, we need to continue mobilizing outside the system, but we also need people inside the system, end quote. At Vermont Conservation Voters, we work to empower and elect climate activists to the State House. Like Rep. Maxim, we recognize that in order to make bold systemic climate action possible, we need to change the composition of those in power. We need more activists to run for office and help shift what is politically possible in Vermont. We are grateful for Rep. Maxim being here to talk about how to run and win on climate action and why we need more activists like all of you to run for office. Please join me in welcoming Rep. Maxim to the stage.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
My mom always calls this part of the day the Welch's grape juice valley of depression, because it's like can't decide whether you should go to sleep or keep going or drink coffee. So I hope this is slightly energizing for you. I'm so grateful to Joey and Jared for reaching out and inviting me here. It's been a while since I've been to Vermont, but I'm really honored to meet all of you and join you in this conversation today. I wanted to put out a couple disclaimers before I launch into my spiel. The first is that graphic design is not my forte, so please don't judge me based on my slides. I go for pictures, not text, but you know, there's a lot of room for improvement in my life. And the other piece is that I'm about to talk about rural politics and how Democrats and progressives in general can reroute our movements in conservative red America. And so much of the work that I do is co-done with my campaign manager, Kenyon Woodward, who is also an ultra runner and had to go on a run because he's training for a race, so he's running around this lake somewhere. But his presence is here, and I want to note that because none of this could happen without him. So, okay. My name is Chloe Maxman. I grew up in a small town called Nobleboro, Maine, 1,600 people. I was raised on my family's farm, and for as long as I can remember, I have just loved my home more than anything, and I have decided to devote my life to fighting for Maine. The biggest threat to Maine, and I think everywhere in the world, as we all agree, is climate change. So I've been working on this climate issue for a really long time, and my theory of change, the way that we think about approaching this issue, has evolved so much over the years. But this is where I am right now. In my mind, what we need to confront the climate crisis is policy. And what we need to get good policy is to elect good people and build good political movements. I think we're struggling a little bit on that front because the folks that we've been electing for years and years have not done what we need to do on the climate front. And we've obviously seen the greatest consequences of that in the 2016 election. In my mind, one of the biggest constituencies that have left behind that could be with us but are not are rural communities. So I spend my time building progressive power in rural communities to ultimately get the political change that we need at the local, state, and federal level. So I really like to articulate that theory of change because I think a lot of people who know that I work on climate are confused that I work on rural politics all the time. I don't necessarily talk about climate, but to me it's all so related and it makes so much sense. So I really like to put that out there. This link between politics and climate was not always super obvious to me. So, and I think up until recently with Sunrise and post-2016, it hasn't really been obvious to a lot of our movement. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about my story and how I got there, and then I'll delve into our House race in District 88 in Maine, and we'll go from there. So, okay. I grew up on a farm, as I mentioned. We raised deer, and those are the deer. They're so beautiful. When I was 12, I got involved with this effort to stop Maine's North Woods from getting developed, and that's how I got kind of roped into activism and organizing and began to learn about climate change. I went to high school in my rural public high school, and I started this thing called the Climate Action Club because no one was talking about climate in my school or my community, but I really wanted to. So there we go. It was actually when I was in high school that I met Jared. This feels like so long ago, but that's what happened. And when we were doing this kind of work, we were really focusing on what we could do as individuals. It was empowering, like May, who talked earlier, we did the No Idling campaign, and we did reusable bags and all of this stuff, and it was good, and we started a conversation, but like looking back right now, like obviously we need way more than that. And so then after high school, I went to Harvard, and when I was at Harvard, I learned about the Trailbreaker pipeline, which I'm assuming all of you know about. No, okay, maybe not. So this is a brilliant plan that is now dead, thank goodness. But it was this is a picture of an existing pipeline that runs across New England. It's defunct now, but it used to carry crude oil from Portland, Maine to Canada. There's a proposal to reverse the flow and bring tar sands across Canada through New England. And in Maine, the chunk of pipeline is owned by the Portland Pipeline Company. You think, oh, that's a nice local fossil fuel company. But in fact, that company is 76% owned by ExxonMobil. So this fact blew my mind. I had no idea that the fossil fuel industry had such deep roots in Maine. And this was at the beginning of going into my second year at Harvard. So that was also the summer that Bill McKibben wrote his Do the Math thing and Rolling Stone, and divestment was really taking off. So I went back to Harvard and I started Divest Harvard. And Divest Harvard was an incredible experience. We started in 2012. The campaign is still going on today. It was organizing at Harvard that I really learned how to organize. Yeah, we'll just keep it that way. So the first thing that we did is we got all the students to vote on divestment, and 72% said, yes, that's a great idea. And the administration wouldn't engage with us, so we kept building power, and this is how I ultimately met Canyon. Canyon hates that I do this, but I've pointed him out in all of my slides so that you can see how integrated our lives are. Because this was in 2012, I believe, that these photos were taken. So the administration was like, no, climate change isn't a big enough issue to warrant divestment, and we were like, you're bonkers. So we started organizing. We did all of these huge rallies. You know, no one was talking about climate at Harvard. Nobody, except some select teachers. So, you know, we were really starting from ground zero. The administration kept ignoring us, so we escalated. We started to do civil disobedience. We blockaded our president's office building. We got 70,000 people signed on to the campaign. Someone was arrested from our group. The first time someone was arrested at Harvard since the Vietnam War protests, and the first arrest of the entire fossil fuel divestment movement. The administration still did nothing, but our movement kept building. So we fasted for 3 days. Our own students sued Harvard for their climate investments. We did a sit-in inside our president's office building. You can see Canyon holding a banner back there. And then still nothing happened, so we shut down our president's office building for 6 days and 6 nights. We had thousands of alumni coming back to campus, had so many people who were ready to get arrested that we could just hop over and shut down the other administrative building when we felt like it. But we built this massive movement. And, you know, just like hundreds and hundreds of people gathering in Harvard Yard to talk about climate change and demand that Harvard does the same thing. Another funny tidbit is that's actually not Canyon that I circled, which is a little embarrassing.
Same here.
I know, they look so similar, don't they? And then, so this was like 2 weeks before we graduated, and Harvard hired a former oil executive as our CFO, and we were all so angry. You can see our faces, we're done. So through all of this time, you know, we're learning how to organize, but we're also on the blockade, like literally as we're doing this stuff, Kenny and I are starting to get really worried, because what we see is that the fossil fuel divestment movement has been so successful at building grassroots momentum, you know, kind of like around an issue of climate change. But the theory of change of divestment was that we build a movement to stigmatize the fossil fuel industry so our politicians won't associate it with it, so that we can reclaim that political space that is supposed to be ours and now belongs to corporations. So we're getting all of this grassroots momentum, but there were no ways to pivot all of that energy towards politics. We weren't running people for office, we weren't engaging with electoral campaigns, so it was like all this power that we built was so separate from our stated goals. And that was really confusing to me. I wrote an entire thesis about it, which is what you see in front of you right there. And the day after I graduated, I moved back to Maine to think about this stuff and worked on it, and worked on Bernie's campaign and a bunch of local campaigns, and went to COP21 in 2015 in Paris. And I just kept seeing our social movements be so separate from our electoral politics. So I also started to notice other patterns which kind of can be distilled into these facts. The first is that when I tried to engage with local politics, there wasn't really a good infrastructure there in Maine to do that. And so that's kind of connected to this statistic that Democrats have lost 968 legislative seats under the Obama administration. I also began to see, especially after 2016, that rural communities like mine were just getting redder and redder, and I could see no way to bring the movements that I was working on into my rural communities. I knew they would die before I ever got started, just because of language and tactics and strategies, they wouldn't translate. And I also saw that kind of thinking being mirrored by the National Democratic Party and how they talk to rural people. So, you know, like at Harvard and organizing these progressive movements that I love, and have devoted my life to are leaving behind the kinds of communities that I grew up in, these rural red communities. So I thought, what better way to tackle this problem than to run for office? So for me, running for office and our campaign in District 88 was about meshing social movements and electoral politics. It's about building a movement that, yes, it gets somebody elected, but those are also movements that are built around issues and what's going on in our community and can hold that person accountable even after they're elected, can go to public hearings, can continue to organize. So it's like a dual purpose movement. I mean, it's just like so much better. So I wanted to introduce you to District 88, where I come from. District 88, before we ran, had a 16 percentage point Republican advantage, which is the same advantage that Republicans hold in rural communities across the country. So that's an interesting mirror. I'm trying to make the point that District 88 and everything I'm about to talk about is not random, but that there are genuine lessons to be learned from what we did that can be translated to other rural communities. District 88 has never been represented by a Democrat until me. And then it experiences so many of the challenges that rural communities, I'm sure here and all across the country, face. Lincoln County, which is most of District 88, is the most rural county in the most rural state in the country. We're also the oldest county in the oldest state in the country. Property taxes are crippling us. People don't represent us. Our voices aren't reflected in policy. It's all very, very frustrating, understandably. So I launched in February 2018. There was already another Democrat who had filed to run, so we had a primary. And we set off going, canvassing, doing house parties, canvassing in the snow, canvassing down the dirt roads. We had a bunch of local artists come together and we painted our own signs. So most of the signs that you would see driving through my district were beautiful, you know, they were painted by really talented people. We had some of the boring ones too, but those weren't nearly as popular. We also had these dedicated canvas days, so a lot of what we did was, yeah, I told you I was going to circle his face. A lot of what we did was very intentionally separating ourselves from how the Maine State Democratic Party operates. I love the Maine State Dems. They do incredible work. I think a lot of the challenges are because of capacity and funding. So we decided to do it all ourselves. So we created all of our own universes, you know, who I go talk to, who my volunteers go and talk to. We did that all of ourselves. We did our own mailers. We did everything by ourselves, including our own trainings for our volunteers. Almost all of the people that you see in these photos had never volunteered on a political campaign before. You can also see that a lot of them are young, and that might be odd because I live in such an old community. But it turns out that when young people run for office, all of their friends are super excited about it. So all my friends would come up to Nobleboro, and you would have super fun canvas weekends. These are some of the pictures of the trainings that we did. How many here have volunteered on a political campaign before? Yeah, how many of you had fun doing it? Okay, maybe you're a better person than I am. Whenever I have volunteered on campaigns, I've gone to like a super drab headquarter, and then I've been sent out by myself, and it's been miserable and cold, and the people have already had their doors knocked on 100 times, and I come back and I get a really bad cookie and then I leave. And it's not fun, there's no community building, and it was just not a good experience on almost every campaign I've ever worked on or volunteered on. So we thought, why can't campaigns be as exciting as social movements? Why can't we create the same kind of community with a structure like this that we did when we were organizing at college, for example? You know, so we would have musicians come in, we would have music, we had people donate food. It was always so fun and so community oriented, and it was beautiful. Here's just a couple more photos, including my dog. I just couldn't resist it. And I love the sign with the lights. It says, "We are glowy for Chloe." That's one of my favorites. We had over 90 letters to the editor as well. And the beautiful thing about rural communities is that we still have printed papers. So we won our primary with 80% of the vote, and that sounds like a lot. It was not that difficult because we just knocked on a lot of doors. We knocked on 10,000 doors in total in our race. But after the primary, I started talking to Republicans and independents because District 88 is only 27% Democrat. So clearly I couldn't get elected just by talking to Democrats. Have y'all used minivan before? Who has not used minivan? Okay, quite a few folks. Minivan is a tool that we use for canvassing, and basically it brings up a house, like you click on the little dot, it brings up a house, it tells you the voter, their name, their age, their gender, and their voting history. I mean, not really their voting history, but who has contacted them before. So when I started knocking on Republicans' doors, I noticed something super interesting. If you look, survey question history, that one, y'all see that? So you can see on the far left and then the second to the left, there's nothing under that. That means that a Democratic canvasser has never knocked on that person's door in their entire voting history. Isn't that crazy? I mean, why would we expect these folks to vote Democrat if we're not knocking on their door? I would also like to mention that I'm a Democrat not because I believe in party politics, but because I believe in the values of the Democratic Party. Equal access and opportunity is how I define it, and I think that the Republican narrative is very much undermining that. So I genuinely don't care in my community what party people are from. I care what values we're representing. So with that being said, the second to the right, you can see that that person hasn't been canvassed by a Democrat since 2008 when Obama was running. And then the one on the far right is somebody that's a Republican who had been canvassed by a Democrat but marked as too GOP to ever go talk to again. So all of these people, I took these screenshots because all of them committed to support our campaign. And even the one on the far right put up my last hand-painted lawn sign on her property, which was so exciting. So I thought that. It just goes to show what happens when you talk to people who we haven't talked to in so long. Like another thing that we did, which I included in this talk because I know that Vermont has pretty small and accessible districts as well, but we talked to people a lot of times to try and build real relationships instead of just something transactional. Like I hated it when I would knock on a door and someone would tell me a heartbreaking story about how they can't afford to go to the doctor, and how can I say, well, can I count on your vote? I mean, it's like too gross for me to even do. So we would make sure that we visited people multiple times. So in the primary, for example, this is my contact history with somebody who was not home. I knocked on the door 8 times, trying to see if they were there. If someone wasn't home during our general canvassing, I knocked on their door 4 times. So that's an independent who was never home. If I did talk to somebody, so this is a Republican who was home, and I talked to them twice. I made sure that I had 2 real conversations with them before Election Day. And if somebody was home, but then I went back and they weren't there, and I went back and they weren't there, and I would keep going back until I talked to them again. So I had to talk to this person, visit their house 3 more times before I had my second conversation with them. But it worked so well because these are my neighbors. They're the people that I share a community with, and now I have an actual relationship with them instead of one that's just based on voting. So we did all of this, and we won with 52.4% of the vote, which is about 219 votes. We worked really hard. We knocked down a lot of doors. But to me, the work does not stop when you get elected. Like I was talking about how we can build these movements to keep our message and our movements going. So I spend most of my time not in Augusta, but in my community, or at least I try. So I do coffee with Chloe every month. I'm always meeting with my constituents in my community and going to events and, doing all of that kind of thing. All of the bills that I've sponsored this session were directly from conversations that I had with my constituents directly for my district. And I actually have a senior transportation bill, which seems very relevant to so much of what's been talked about today. But I think one thing that I did want to dig in a little bit deeper on is the Maine Green New Deal, which is a bill that I sponsored and that didn't get passed and signed into law, so that was exciting. But some people were really puzzled at why someone who just got elected in a super conservative district would sponsor a Green New Deal bill. And I had a very specific reason. I had two reasons. My first reason is that I wanted everybody to pay attention to it. I wrote the Green New Deal bill with the labor unions in Maine, and I think we all know that there hasn't been the best relationship between labor and climate when it comes to building our movements. And so I really wanted a climate bill that was rooted in rural communities like mine, and that could try and translate some of the momentum that we're feeling around climate into a more rural context. So I thought if I called the Green New Deal, everyone would pay attention to it, we could have this big conversation about what our climate movement looks like, how we're talking to each other, the people that are part of our coalitions, and we can maybe broaden our umbrella just a little bit. And that worked actually quite well. So we were the first Green New Deal legislation in the country to be endorsed by an AFL-CIO affiliate after the national one said no thank you. And you can just see some of the organizing and faces that we brought in. We also, since my background is in youth climate organizing, I made sure that the day of our public hearing was the same day as the Youth Climate Day of Action in Augusta, so that young folks could come and testify and have their voices heard. And it turned into a really amazing public hearing because almost everyone who testified was from a union or was a young person. And to me, how we transition to a renewable energy economy is just as important as the fact that we actually do it. And we do not want to replicate the same injustices of climate change in this transition. So that's why we call it a just transition. And for me, that means making sure that rural voices, working class voices are prioritized in the climate conversation. So the Maine Green New Deal was passed. These are the super exciting moments when it happened. The left one is when the committee approved it, and the right one is Governor Mills signing it into law. And that was so exciting. I just wanted to add one more little piece here. So many people ask me how we won in District 88, and my answer is always very simple. It's listening and respecting what the other person is saying. I was listening this week to some of the voice memos that I took while I was canvassing. After I had a hard door or something like that, I would just talk to myself or my phone. And at the beginning of the campaign, I talk about, that I consider myself to be a very progressive person and how challenging it is to hear some of the really strong anti-climate, anti-immigrant, anti-welfare thinking that's out there. But by just simply listening and respecting the people that I was talking to, the people in my community, I discovered something really powerful, which is that we're all frustrated. I remember this one conversation I had with an older woman who was telling me how she can't afford to retire, she has to sell her home, and I remember she just got out of the shower because she had to go to work, and it was heartbreaking. And then she started telling me about how it's so unfair that immigrants coming into our country get benefits and she doesn't get the benefits that she's worked for her whole life. So that's a narrative or a logic that I don't agree with, but I can understand that frustration. I had another conversation with a couple who was very pro-life, very anti-immigrant, and very pro-Trump, and we had a very intense conversation. I was listening to this conversation, and I'm not even going to tell you some of the things that we talked about, but in the end, we talked about these really, really, really hard, controversial issues, and in the end, I remarked that we ended our conversation by agreeing that you can be a good person and a good neighbor while